Racist woman screams at autistic man in a cafe, then the waitress steps in. The cafe hummed with activity on a crisp morning. The sound of steaming milk, clinking cups, and soft conversations filled the air. Ethan sat at his usual table by the window, his focus fixed on the book in front of him. His hands fidgeted with the edge of his sleeves, and every few minutes, he adjusted his noise-canceling headphones to block out the overwhelming sensory input around him. Ethan wasn't just another customer. To those who worked at the cafe, he was a regular, always polite and punctual. His quirks, like lining up his coffee cup, sugar packet, and notebook in perfect alignment, were just part of who he was. And while Ethan rarely spoke, his smile and gentle demeanor spoke volumes. Today, however, something shifted in the calm routine of the cafe. The front door swung open with a sharp clang of the bell, and in walked Margaret, a woman in her late 40s, her expression sour and disapproving. Dressed in an expensive coat and carrying an oversized designer bag, she scanned the cafe with a critical eye, clearly unimpressed. Margaret stepped up to the counter, her voice sharp as she ordered. "Large cappuccino, extra foam, and make it quick. Some of us have places to be." The barista, Clara, nodded and began preparing the drink. Clara had seen Margaret before, a demanding customer who often left scathing remarks about the service. But Clara, ever the professional, worked with a calm efficiency that belied her annoyance. As Margaret waited, her gaze landed on Ethan. He was engrossed in his book, his coffee untouched, and his belongings meticulously arranged on the table. Something about his quiet concentration seemed to bother her. Margaret marched over to his table, her heels clicking loudly on the floor. "Excuse me," she said, her tone icy. "Are you planning to sit here all day?" Ethan looked up, startled. He blinked at her, unsure how to respond. "This is a cafe," Margaret continued, her voice rising. "Not your living room. People like you think you can just take up space without consideration for others?" Ethan opened his mouth to reply but hesitated, his hands gripping the edges of his book. His mind raced as he tried to process her words, the confrontation making it difficult for him to speak. Margaret's voice grew louder, drawing the attention of other customers. "Are you even listening to me? You're just sitting there, staring into space. It's ridiculous." Clara, who had been watching from the counter, set down the cup she was holding and stepped out from behind the bar. She approached the table with purposeful strides, her face a mask of calm professionalism, though her eyes burned with anger. "Is there a problem here?" Clara asked, her voice firm but polite. Margaret turned to Clara, clearly irritated. "Yes, there is. This man is taking up an entire table and he's not even doing anything. People are waiting for seats." Clara glanced at Ethan, who was visibly upset. His shoulders were hunched, and he was fidgeting with his sleeves, a clear sign of his distress. Clara knelt slightly to meet Ethan's eye level, her voice softening. "Ethan," she said gently, "you're okay? You don't have to move if you don't want to." Ethan nodded slightly, though his hands continued to fidget. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," he murmured. "You didn't," Clara assured him. She stood up and turned back to Margaret, her expression hardening. "He's not bothering anyone. He's a regular here, and he has every right to sit at this table." Margaret scoffed. "A regular? That doesn't mean he can hog a whole table during the busiest time of day. People like him don't even belong in places like this." The cafe fell silent. Several customers looked up from their tables, their expressions a mix of shock and disapproval. Clara took a step closer to Margaret, her voice steady but firm. "People like him?" Clara repeated. "Do you even hear yourself? Ethan is a paying customer, just like everyone else here. If you have a problem with that, maybe this isn't the place for you." Margaret's face flushed with anger. "Are you seriously taking his side? He can't even speak properly. And what kind of business lets people like him take over the place?" Clara's jaw tightened, but she refused to lose her composure. The kind of business that values kindness and respect over ignorance and prejudice. "If you can't treat people with decency, then you're not welcome here." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cafe. One of the customers, a middle-aged man sitting nearby, spoke up. "She's right. You're the only one causing a scene here." Another customer, A young woman with a laptop added, "Maybe you should leave and let the rest of us enjoy our coffee in peace." Margaret looked around, realizing that she had lost the crowd. With a huff, she grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. "This place is a joke," she muttered as she pushed it open and left. The tension in the room dissolved as the door closed behind her. Clara turned back to Ethan, who was still sitting quietly, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Ethan," she said softly, "are you okay?" He nodded slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." Clara smiled warmly. "You don't have to thank me. You did nothing wrong." She walked back to the counter, and the cafe gradually returned to its usual rhythm. Several customers came up to Clara, commending her for standing up to Margaret. But Clara brushed off their praise, her focus still on Ethan. Ethan sat at the table, staring blankly at his book. The confrontation had left him rattled, his thoughts swirling in a way he couldn't quite control. He carefully adjusted his coffee cup, the action giving him a small sense of stability amidst the chaos. Clara returned with a warm smile and set a fresh cookie on a napkin in front of him. "On the house," she said gently. "Take your time, okay?" Ethan looked up at her, his lips curving into a tentative smile. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice soft but sincere. As Clara turned back to the counter, a man who had been sitting nearby approached her. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice low. "That was really great what you did back there. I've seen her here before, she's always causing trouble." Clara shrugged. Someone had to say something. "Ethan's a good guy. He just wants to enjoy his coffee like everyone else." The man nodded. I could tell she was out of line. But, not everyone would have stood up to her. "You made a difference." Clara smiled faintly, appreciating the sentiment but not wanting to dwell on it. She returned to her work, keeping an eye on Ethan from across the room. Gradually, the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, the incident becoming just another story for the regulars to share. Later that afternoon, as the cafe began to quiet down, Ethan approached the counter. He clutched his notebook tightly, his fingers tracing the edges of the worn cover. "Clara," he said hesitantly. She looked up from the espresso machine, her expression instantly softening. "What's up, Ethan? I don't know how to thank you," he said, his words halting but heartfelt. "You didn't have to do that." Clara leaned against the counter, her voice warm. "Ethan, you don't owe me anything. That woman was wrong, and I wasn't about to let her treat you like that. You deserve to be here just as much as anyone else." Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze dropping to his notebook. After a moment of hesitation, he opened it and carefully tore out a page. He handed it to Clara, his hands trembling slightly. Clara took the page and gasped softly. It was a sketch of the cafe, beautifully detailed and filled with life. In the corner, she recognized herself, holding a tray of coffee cups with a determined expression. "This is amazing," she said, her voice filled with awe. "You're so talented, Ethan." "It's for you," he said quickly, his cheeks flushing. "I wanted to show my gratitude." Clara clutched the sketch to her chest, her eyes misting. "Thank you, Ethan. This means so much to me." Word of the incident spread quickly through the cafe's small community. Regular customers began reaching out to Ethan, offering kind words and gestures of support. One elderly woman, who often sat near the window knitting, handed him a handmade scarf. "For those chilly mornings," she said with a warm smile. "You're a wonderful part of this place, Ethan. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Ethan's confidence grew in small but significant ways. He started greeting the baristas by name, even making occasional small talk with other customers. Clara noticed the change and felt a deep sense of pride. She had always believed in the power of kindness, and seeing Ethan blossom was proof of what it could do. Meanwhile, Margaret's outburst didn't go unnoticed. Several customers had recorded the incident on their phones, and the videos quickly gained traction online. Comments flooded in, condemning Margaret's behavior and praising Clara for standing up for Ethan. "This is the kind of allyship we need in the world," one commenter wrote. "Props to the waitress for shutting down that nonsense," another added. The cafe received an influx of messages from people who had seen the video. Many praised Clara's actions, while others shared their own stories of facing discrimination and finding support in unexpected places. Clara read each message with a heavy heart, realizing how common these experiences were. One day, about a week after the incident, Margaret returned to the cafe. She walked in with a stiff posture, her gaze sweeping the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. Clara tensed at the sight of her but quickly composed herself. Margaret approached the counter, her expression unreadable. "I need to speak with you," she said, her tone clipped. Clara folded her arms. "If this is about last week, I'm not interested in hearing excuses." "It's not an excuse," Margaret said, her voice wavering slightly. I've been thinking a lot about what happened. And I realize I was out of line." Clara raised an eyebrow, surprised but skeptical. "Go on." Margaret glanced around, her discomfort evident. "I didn't mean to cause such a scene. I was frustrated, and I took it out on someone who didn't deserve it." "Sorry." Clara studied her for a moment, trying to gauge the sincerity of her words. "Apologies are a start," she said cautiously. "But actions speak louder." Margaret nodded, her lips pressing into a thin line. "I'd like to apologize to him. Is he here?" Clara hesitated, unsure whether to trust Margaret's intentions. But before she could decide, Ethan walked in, his usual calm demeanor intact. He paused when he saw Margaret, his expression wary. "Ethan," Clara said gently, stepping forward. "Margaret has something she'd like to say to you." Ethan glanced between them, his hands tightening around the strap of his bag. "Okay," he said quietly. Margaret took a deep breath, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I want to apologize for how I treated you," she said. "I was wrong and I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that." Ethan blinked, clearly caught off guard. He shifted uncomfortably but nodded. "Thank you," he said softly. Margaret looked at him, her expression filled with a mix of regret and awkwardness. I hope you can forgive me." Ethan hesitated, then nodded again. "It's okay," he said simply. Margaret gave a small, stiff smile and turned to leave. As she walked out the door, the tension in the room dissipated, leaving behind a sense of closure. In the weeks that followed, life at the cafe settled back into its usual rhythm. Ethan continued to visit regularly, his confidence growing with each interaction. Clara framed his sketch and hung it on the wall behind the counter, a daily reminder of the impact of small acts of kindness. The cafe became a symbol of community and resilience, a place where people from all walks of life could come together and feel valued. And for Ethan, it was more than just a cafe. It was a sanctuary, a place where he belonged. Ethan's confidence continued to grow in the weeks following the incident. Customers who had witnessed the confrontation often stopped by his table to chat or offer a kind word. For someone who had spent much of his life feeling invisible or misunderstood, these small gestures meant the world. Clara noticed the change in him, too. He began arriving at the cafe a little earlier and staying a little longer, often sketching or reading in his usual spot by the window. His once tentative greetings to the staff had evolved into warm, genuine exchanges. It was as if a part of him that had been hidden away was finally starting to emerge. One morning, Clara decided to take a break from her shift and join Ethan at his table. She carried 2 cups of coffee and placed one in front of him. "Mind if I sit?" Ethan looked up, surprised but pleased. "Sure," he said, gesturing to the seat across from him. Clara settled in and took a sip of her coffee. "So," she said, nodding toward the sketchbook in front of him, "what are you working on today?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then turned the sketchbook around to show her. The page was filled with intricate drawings of people, each one bursting with life and emotion. Clara recognized a few familiar faces, regulars from the cafe, herself included. "These are incredible," she said, her voice full of admiration. "You've got an amazing gift, Ethan." He blushed, ducking his head. "Thank you. I've been drawing since I was a kid. It helps me make sense of things." Clara smiled. "Well, I think you've got a real talent. Have you ever thought about sharing your work? Like in an art show or something?" Ethan shook his head quickly. "I wouldn't even know where to start. I don't think people would be interested." "I think you'd be surprised," Clara said. "Your art tells a story. And stories have a way of connecting with people." Ethan considered her words but didn't respond. Instead, he turned the page and began sketching again, his pencil moving with quiet confidence. The cafe continued to thrive as the weeks turned into months. The staff often joked that Ethan's table had become the heart of the place. Customers gravitated toward him, drawn by his quiet warmth and the unassuming way he interacted with the world. One day, a young woman named Sarah approached Ethan's table. She was carrying a large canvas bag, and her eyes lit up when she saw the sketch he was working on. "Hi," she said, her voice cheerful but not intrusive. "I couldn't help noticing your drawing. It's amazing." Ethan glanced up, startled by the compliment. "Thank you," he said softly. Sarah smiled and gestured to the chair across from him. "Do you mind if I sit? I'm an artist too, and I'd love to hear about your process." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." As they talked, Clara watched from behind the counter, a smile tugging at her lips. She could see how nervous Ethan was, but she also noticed how Sarah's enthusiasm seemed to put him at ease. By the time Sarah left, they had exchanged contact information, and Ethan looked more animated than Clara had ever seen him. Later, as Clara wiped down tables, Ethan approached her with a rare grin. "Sarah said there's an art exhibit coming up," he said. "She thinks I should submit something." "That's fantastic," Clara said, beaming. "Are you going to do it?" Ethan's smile faltered slightly. "I'm not sure. What if people don't like it?" Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "Ethan, your work is incredible. But more importantly, it's yours. Whether people like it or not doesn't change the fact that it's worth sharing. And I'll be there to cheer you on every step of the way." With Clara and Sarah's encouragement, Ethan decided to submit one of his sketches to the exhibit. He chose the drawing he had made of the cafe, the one Clara had framed and hung on the wall. It felt fitting, a tribute to the place and the people who had become his sanctuary. The weeks leading up to the exhibit were filled with a mix of excitement and nerves. Clara and the other cafe staff helped Ethan prepare, offering advice and support whenever he needed it. Sarah stopped by regularly, bringing him art supplies and helping him navigate the submission process. When the day of the exhibit finally arrived, Ethan stood in the gallery, his heart pounding as he looked around at the crowd. His sketch was displayed on a pristine white wall, the nameplate beneath it reading, "Ethan Carter, the heart of the cafe." Clara and Sarah stood beside him, their expressions filled with pride. "You did it," Clara said, squeezing his arm. "You're amazing, Ethan." The hours passed in a blur of introductions and compliments. People stopped to admire Ethan's work, many of them commenting on the warmth and humanity it conveyed. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt truly seen. As the evening wound down, a man approached Ethan, his expression thoughtful. "Hi," he said, extending a hand. "I'm James Peterson. I run a nonprofit that supports artists with disabilities. Your work is incredible, and I'd love to talk to you about showcasing more of it." Ethan stared at him, stunned. "Really?" "Absolutely," James said. "Your talent deserves to be celebrated. Here's my card. Give me a call when you're ready." Ethan took the card with trembling hands, his mind racing. He turned to Clara and Sarah, who were grinning from ear to ear. "This is just the beginning," Clara said, her voice full of emotion. "You're going to do amazing things, Ethan. I know it." Over the months that followed, Ethan's life transformed in ways he had never imagined. With James's guidance, he began participating in more exhibits, each one bringing him closer to his dream of becoming a full-time artist. His confidence grew with every piece he shared, and his circle of supporters expanded to include people from all walks of life. The cafe remained his sanctuary, a place where he could recharge and find inspiration. Clara continued to be his biggest cheerleader, always ready with a kind word or a cup of coffee on the house. And while Margaret never returned, her actions had set off a chain of events that had changed Ethan's life for the better. One day, as Ethan sat at his usual table sketching, Clara approached him with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "this cafe wouldn't be the same without you." Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with gratitude. "It wouldn't be the same without you either." Clara smiled, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan had come so far, and she couldn't wait to see where his journey would take him next. Ethan's art began gaining traction, and word spread about the quiet genius whose sketches captured more than just visuals. They seemed to capture emotions and stories. Local newspapers featured him, calling his work a testament to resilience and talent. With every new exhibit, Ethan's confidence grew, but he remained deeply humble. The cafe, now affectionately nicknamed Ethan's Corner by regulars, had become a community hub. Customers would often stop by just to see if Ethan had created a new sketch. Clara noticed how people seemed to gravitate toward him, and it filled her with pride to see the change. One day, Sarah walked into the cafe with a bright smile and a folder in her hands. "Ethan," she called, her voice filled with excitement. "Guess what?" Ethan looked up from his sketchbook, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. "What's going on?" Sarah placed the folder on the table and opened it to reveal a colorful flyer. "There's a national art competition happening next month," she explained. "They're accepting entries from emerging artists, and I think you should submit your work." Ethan's eyes widened. "A national competition? I don't know, Sarah. That sounds big." "It is big," Sarah said, her voice encouraging. "But you're ready for it. You've been working so hard, and this is the perfect opportunity to take things to the next level." Clara, who had overheard the conversation from behind the counter, approached with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "She's right, Ethan," she said, setting the cups down. "You've already proven you can handle local exhibits. This is just the next step." Ethan stared at the flyer, his mind racing. The thought of putting his work on a national stage was both thrilling and terrifying. "What if I don't win?" he asked quietly. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not about winning," she said. "It's about showing the world what you can do. Whether you win or not, people will see your talent. That's what matters." Ethan nodded slowly, the encouragement sinking in. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it." Over the next few weeks, Ethan poured himself into preparing for the competition. He spent hours at the cafe, sketching and refining his ideas. Clara and Sarah were by his side every step of the way, offering feedback and support. The customers, too, rallied around him, frequently stopping by his table to see his progress and offer words of encouragement. The day before the submission deadline, Ethan unveiled his final piece. It was a sprawling sketch that depicted the cafe in intricate detail. The drawing wasn't just of the physical space, it included the people who made it special. Clara, Sarah, and even some of the regular customers were featured, their expressions full of life and warmth. "This is incredible," Clara said, her eyes glistening as she examined the piece. "You've captured the soul of this place." Sarah nodded in agreement. "This is going to blow the judges away." Ethan smiled, his cheeks flushing with pride. For the first time, he felt like he had truly created something meaningful. The day of the competition arrived, and Ethan traveled to the venue with Sarah and Clara by his side. The gallery was filled with stunning artwork from artists all over the country. Ethan felt a pang of doubt as he looked around, but Clara placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "Remember," she said, her voice steady, "you belong here." Ethan nodded, taking a deep breath. He submitted his piece and joined the crowd, waiting for the judges to make their rounds. The hours seemed to stretch endlessly, but when the results were finally announced, Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Third place," the announcer said, "goes to Ethan Carter for his piece, The Heart of the Cafe." The room erupted into applause as Ethan made his way to the stage. His hands trembled as he accepted the certificate, and when he turned to face the audience, he saw Clara and Sarah cheering louder than anyone else. Later that evening, as they celebrated over dinner, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. "I never would have done this without you too," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "You did all the hard work," Sarah replied with a grin. "We just gave you a little push." Clara raised her glass. "To Ethan," she said, "and to the incredible journey that's just beginning." As Ethan's career continued to flourish, he made it a point to give back to the community that had supported him. He started hosting art workshops at the cafe, teaching others how to express themselves through drawing. The workshops became wildly popular, drawing people of all ages and backgrounds. One day, during a workshop, Ethan noticed a young boy sitting alone at a table, nervously clutching a pencil. The boy reminded him of himself at that age, shy, uncertain, and longing for connection. Ethan approached the boy and knelt beside him. "Hi," he said gently. "What's your name?" "Lucas," the boy replied, barely above a whisper. "Hi, Lucas. What are you working on?" Ethan asked. Lucas hesitated, then held up his sketchpad. The drawing was rough but full of potential, a vivid scene of a forest filled with animals. "This is amazing," Ethan said sincerely. "You've got a real talent." Lucas's face lit up with a shy smile. "Really? Really?" Ethan said. "Would you like some tips on how to make it even better?" Lucas nodded eagerly, and Ethan spent the rest of the workshop guiding him through the process. By the end of the session, Lucas's confidence had grown, and he left the cafe with a new sense of pride in his work. Clara watched the interaction from behind the counter, her heart swelling with pride. Ethan had come so far, and now he was inspiring others to find their voice through art. One evening, as the cafe was closing, Ethan approached Clara with a framed sketch in his hands. "This is for you," he said, handing it to her. Clara took the frame and gasped softly. The sketch was of her, standing behind the counter with her warm smile and welcoming demeanor. Above her head, Ethan had written the words, "The heart of the cafe." "Ethan," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "this is beautiful." "Thank you. You've done so much for me," Ethan said. "I wanted you to know how much it means to me." Clara hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You've come such a long way," she said. "And I couldn't be prouder of you." As Ethan left the cafe that night, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. The cafe had given him more than just a place to sit and sketch. It had given him a community, a sense of purpose, and the courage to pursue his dreams. Ethan's life had transformed into something he never thought possible. His days were now filled with not just his art, but also the relationships he'd built along the way. Yet, even with all the growth and success, there was still a part of him that struggled with self-doubt. It was a lingering shadow that sometimes crept in during quiet moments, whispering that he didn't belong in this new life. One particularly cold morning, as Ethan sat in his usual spot at the cafe, he noticed Clara bustling around, preparing for a busy day. The holidays were approaching, and the cafe was decked out with twinkling lights and garlands. A small tree stood in the corner, adorned with handmade ornaments crafted by the local community, a tradition Clara had started years ago. Ethan stared at the scene, his pencil hovering over his sketchpad. He had been working on a piece for weeks now, something deeply personal that he hadn't shown anyone. It was a depiction of his life's journey, his struggles, his growth, and the people who had helped him along the way. At the center of the piece was the cafe, surrounded by figures who represented the community that had embraced him. Clara approached his table, balancing a tray of steaming coffee and a plate of cookies. "You've been quiet today," she said, setting the tray down. "Everything okay?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just thinking." Clara sat across from him, her expression soft and understanding. "Want to talk about it?" Ethan considered her offer, then decided to share what was on his mind. "I'm working on something different," he said, opening his sketchpad to show her the unfinished piece. Clara's eyes widened as she took in the intricate details of the drawing. "Ethan," she breathed, "this is incredible. It's like a snapshot of your soul." Ethan blushed, his hands fidgeting with the edges of the sketchpad. "I'm not sure if it's good enough," he admitted. "It's so personal, and I don't know if anyone would understand it." Clara reached across the table, placing her hand over his. "Art isn't about being good enough," she said. "It's about telling your story and connecting with others. And this will speak to people. I know it." Her words gave Ethan the courage he needed to keep going. Over the next few days, he poured himself into the piece, adding the final touches that brought it to life. When he finished, he decided to unveil it during the cafe's annual holiday event, a gathering that brought the entire community together. The day of the event arrived, and the cafe buzzed with excitement. Families, friends, and regular customers filled the space, their laughter and chatter mingling with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. Clara had gone all out, setting up a small stage for performances and a display area for Ethan's artwork. As the evening progressed, Ethan stood near the display, nervously watching as people admired his work. His final piece, the one he had poured his heart into, was covered with a cloth, waiting for the big reveal. Clara took the stage, her warm smile radiating through the room. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she said. "This cafe has always been about more than just coffee. It's about community, connection, and celebrating each other's stories. And tonight, we're honored to share a very special story, Ethan's." The crowd erupted into applause as Clara gestured for Ethan to join her on stage. He stepped up hesitantly, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the microphone. "Hi," he began, his voice soft but steady. I wanted to say thank you. To Clara, to all of you for giving me a place to belong. This cafe has been my safe haven, and I'm so grateful for the support and kindness you've shown me." He turned to the display and slowly removed the cloth, revealing his final piece. The room fell silent as everyone took in the intricate details of the drawing. It was more than just a work of art. It was a testament to resilience, love, and the power of community. The crowd erupted into applause once more, and Ethan's heart swelled with a mix of pride and gratitude. People approached him throughout the evening, sharing how deeply the piece had touched them. Many had tears in their eyes, moved by the vulnerability and beauty of his work. As the event wound down, Ethan sat at his usual table, taking a moment to soak in the atmosphere. Clara joined him, her expression glowing with pride. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "You shared your story, and look at how many people it's touched." Ethan nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "It feels surreal. I never thought I'd have this kind of support." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've always had it, Ethan. You just needed to see it for yourself." In the weeks that followed, Ethan's artwork continued to gain recognition. He was invited to participate in exhibits, collaborate with other artists, and even speak at events about his journey. Despite his growing success, he remained grounded, always returning to the cafe that had given him his start. One day, Clara approached him with an envelope in her hands. "This came for you," she said, handing it over. Ethan opened the envelope and found a letter from a prestigious art gallery in New York City. They had seen his work online and wanted to feature him in an upcoming exhibit. His heart raced as he read the letter, his mind reeling with disbelief. "New York City," he murmured. "That's huge." Clara grinned. "It is. And you deserve it." Ethan's thoughts swirled with excitement and uncertainty. The opportunity was incredible, but it also meant stepping even further out of his comfort zone. He looked at Clara, his voice trembling. "Do you think I'm ready for this?" Clara's expression softened. "Ethan, you've been ready for this for a long time. You've worked so hard to get here, and you've shown the world what you're capable of. This is just the next chapter of your story." Ethan nodded, her words giving him the courage he needed to take the leap. He said, "I'll do it." The months leading up to the New York exhibit were a whirlwind of preparation. Ethan spent countless hours creating new pieces, each one reflecting a different aspect of his journey. Claire and Sarah continued to support him, cheering him on every step of the way. When the day of the exhibit arrived, Ethan found himself standing in a bustling gallery, surrounded by some of the most influential figures in the art world. His work was displayed prominently, each piece drawing admiration and praise. As the evening progressed, Ethan was approached by a well-dressed man with a warm smile. "Mr. Carter," the man said, extending a hand. "I'm David Langston, the curator of this gallery. Your work is extraordinary." Ethan shook his hand, his voice steady despite his nerves. "Thank you. It means a lot to hear that." David gestured to one of Ethan's pieces. "This one in particular caught my eye. The way you capture emotion is remarkable. I'd love to discuss the possibility of a solo exhibit here in the future." Ethan's breath caught, his mind racing. A solo exhibit? It was more than he had ever dreamed of. "I'd love that," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. As the night came to a close, Ethan stood by the gallery entrance, watching as people admired his work. For the first time in his life, he felt truly confident in who he was and what he had to offer. Clara and Sarah, who had traveled to New York to support him, approached with beaming smiles. "You did it," Clara said, pulling him into a hug. "I'm so proud of you." Ethan smiled, his heart full. I couldn't have done it without you. As they stepped out into the crisp New York air, Ethan looked up at the city lights, a sense of possibility washing over him. His journey was far from over, but he knew he was ready for whatever came next. Returning from New York, Ethan's heart was full of excitement but also tinged with nerves. He had reached a new level in his career, but the idea of balancing this newfound attention with the life he loved at the cafe felt overwhelming. The cafe had been his anchor, the place that grounded him, and he wasn't sure how to handle being pulled in so many directions. Clara noticed the change in him almost immediately. "Ethan," she said one afternoon as she placed his usual coffee on the table, "you've been quieter than usual. Is everything okay?" Ethan looked up from his sketch pad, his pencil pausing mid-stroke. "It's just a lot," he admitted. "The exhibit was amazing, but now there are so many opportunities coming my way. It feels like everything's happening too fast." Clara sat down across from him, her expression gentle. "That's understandable," she said. "You've worked so hard to get here, and it's okay to feel overwhelmed. But remember, you don't have to do everything at once. Take things one step at a time." Ethan nodded, her words offering some comfort. "I just don't want to lose the connection I have here. This cafe, this community, it means so much to me. And it always will," Clara said firmly. "No matter where you go or what you do, this place will always be your home." A few weeks later, Ethan received an invitation to speak at a prestigious art conference in Chicago. The event was a chance to share his journey and inspire others, but the thought of standing in front of a crowd made his stomach twist in knots. He confided in Clara and Sarah, who both encouraged him to take the opportunity. "You've got an incredible story to tell," Sarah said. "And who knows? You might help someone else find their path." With their support, Ethan decided to accept the invitation. He spent days preparing his speech, pouring his heart into every word. When the day of the conference arrived, he stood backstage, his hands trembling as he clutched his notes. "You've got this," Sarah whispered, squeezing his shoulder. "Just speak from the heart." Ethan took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The audience fell silent as he began to speak, his voice steady despite the butterflies in his stomach. "I never thought I'd be standing here today," he began. "For most of my life, I struggled to find my place in the world. I felt invisible, misunderstood, and unsure of my worth. But everything changed when I found a community that believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." As he shared his journey, the audience hung on his every word. He spoke about the cafe, the people who had supported him, and how art had given him a voice. By the time he finished, the room erupted into applause, and Ethan felt a surge of pride unlike anything he had ever experienced. Back at the cafe, Ethan's life continued to evolve. His workshops became even more popular, drawing people from all over the city. He was particularly drawn to helping young artists who, like him, struggled with confidence and self-expression. One day, a teenage girl named Mia attended one of his workshops. She was shy and withdrawn, her sketchpad clutched tightly to her chest. Ethan noticed her hesitation and approached her with a warm smile. "Hi, Mia," he said gently. "What are you working on?" Mia hesitated, then opened her sketchpad to reveal a series of intricate drawings. Ethan's eyes lit up as he examined her work. "These are amazing," he said sincerely. "You've got a real gift." Mia's face flushed with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. "Thanks," she murmured. "I've just never shown them to anyone before." "Well, I'm honored you're sharing them with me," Ethan said. "You've got so much potential, Mia. Don't be afraid to let the world see it." Mia's confidence grew under Ethan's guidance, and over time, she began sharing her work with others. Watching her blossom reminded Ethan of his own journey, and it reaffirmed his commitment to helping others find their voice. As Ethan's reputation grew, he was approached by a publishing company interested in creating a book of his sketches. The idea both thrilled and terrified him. Putting his work into a book felt like an incredibly personal endeavor. He discussed the offer with Clara and Sarah, who both encouraged him to take the leap. "Your work has already touched so many people," Clara said. "This book could inspire even more." With their support, Ethan decided to move forward with the project. He spent months selecting his favorite pieces and writing captions that shared the stories behind each sketch. The process was emotional and cathartic, and by the time the book was complete, Ethan felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The book, titled The Heart of the Cafe and Other Stories, was released to critical acclaim. Readers praised its vulnerability and authenticity, and it quickly became a bestseller. Ethan was invited to book signings and interviews, and his story continued to inspire people all over the world. Despite his growing fame, Ethan remained grounded. He continued spending time at the cafe, sketching and connecting with the community that had supported him from the beginning. Clara often teased him about being a local celebrity, but Ethan always brushed it off. One evening, as the cafe was closing, Clara approached Ethan with a thoughtful expression. "You know," she said, "this place wouldn't be the same without you." Ethan smiled, his heart full. "And I wouldn't be the same without this place." As he left the cafe that night, Ethan reflected on how far he had come. He had faced his fears, embraced his talent, and built a life filled with purpose and connection. And while his journey was far from over, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Months later, Ethan was invited to deliver a keynote speech at a major art gala. The event was a celebration of creativity and resilience, and Ethan was honored to be part of it. As he stood on stage, looking out at the crowd, he felt a deep sense of gratitude. "I used to think that being different was a weakness," he began. "But I've learned that our differences are what make us unique. They're what give us strength, creativity, and the ability to connect with others in meaningful ways." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. To anyone out there who feels invisible or misunderstood, know that you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And when you find the courage to share it, you can change the world. The audience erupted into applause, and Ethan felt tears prick his eyes. He had come so far, and he knew that his journey was just beginning. As he stepped off the stage, Clara and Sarah were waiting for him, their faces beaming with pride. "You were amazing," Clara said, pulling him into a hug. Ethan smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." The three of them stood together, a testament to the power of community, love, and the courage to follow one's dreams. And as Ethan looked toward the future, he knew that anything was possible. Ethan's keynote speech at the art gala marked a new chapter in his life. The exposure brought even more opportunities his way, including offers from international galleries, collaborations with renowned artists, and invitations to conferences around the world. While Ethan was grateful for the recognition, he was careful not to lose sight of what mattered most to him, the connections he had built at the cafe and within the community. One day, while sketching at his usual spot in the cafe, Ethan was approached by a man in a crisp suit. The man introduced himself as Andrew Clark, a wealthy investor who had recently seen Ethan's work at the gala. "Ethan, your story is remarkable," Andrew said, sitting across from him. "Your art is not only inspiring but also commercially valuable. I'd like to discuss an opportunity to expand your brand." Ethan frowned slightly, setting his pencil down. "Expand my brand?" he repeated, unsure of what Andrew meant. Andrew smiled. "Imagine this, your own line of merchandise, art prints, collaborations with major companies. We could even launch an online platform where people from all over the world can purchase your work and learn from you through virtual workshops." While the idea sounded exciting, something about it felt overwhelming. Ethan wasn't sure if he wanted his art to become a business empire. "I appreciate the offer," he said carefully, "but I'd need some time to think about it." "Of course," Andrew said smoothly, sliding his business card across the table. "Take your time. But remember, opportunities like this don't come around often." After Andrew left, Ethan sat in silence, staring at the business card. He knew this was a crossroads moment, a chance to take his career to the next level. But deep down, he wondered if chasing fame and fortune would mean losing the authenticity that had always defined his art. Ethan shared his dilemma with Clara and Sarah later that evening. Clara, ever the voice of wisdom, reminded him to stay true to himself. "Success is wonderful, Ethan," she said, "but only if it aligns with your values. Don't let anyone push you into something you're not comfortable with." Sarah nodded in agreement. "Your art has always been about connection and storytelling. If expanding your brand means sacrificing that, it might not be worth it. Their words resonated deeply with Ethan, and after much reflection, he decided to decline Andrew's offer. He sent a polite email thanking Andrew for the opportunity but explaining that his focus would remain on creating meaningful art and fostering connections through his workshops. Andrew's response was curt and dismissive, but Ethan didn't let it bother him. He knew he had made the right choice, and he felt a renewed sense of purpose in staying true to his values. In the months that followed, Ethan threw himself into his work with even more passion. He launched a new series of workshops focused on helping marginalized artists find their voice, and he began collaborating with local schools to introduce art programs for children. The response was overwhelmingly positive, and Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment in giving back to the community. One day, during a workshop at the cafe, Ethan met a young boy named Leo. Leo was only 9 years old, but his talent was astonishing. His drawings were filled with vivid colors and imaginative details that seemed beyond his years. "Leo," Ethan said, kneeling beside him, "this is incredible. Have you been drawing for a long time?" Leo nodded shyly. "My mom says I started when I was 2, he said. "But I don't show my drawings to anyone because I'm scared they'll laugh." Ethan's heart ached at the boy's words, and he gently placed a hand on Leo's shoulder. "You know, I used to feel the same way," he said. "But sharing your art isn't about what other people think. It's about expressing yourself and finding joy in what you create." Leo looked up at him, his eyes wide. "Really? Really?" Ethan said with a smile. "And I'd love to see more of your work if you're willing to share." Over time, Leo became a regular at Ethan's workshops, and his confidence grew with each session. Watching the boy's transformation reminded Ethan of his own journey, and it reaffirmed his belief in the power of art to change lives. As Ethan's workshops continued to flourish, he began receiving letters and emails from people around the world who had been inspired by his story. One letter, in particular, stood out. It was from a woman named Margaret, who described how Ethan's art had helped her through a difficult time. "I lost my husband last year," Margaret wrote, "and I've been struggling to find joy in life again. But when I saw your sketches, something shifted. Your work reminded me of the beauty in everyday moments, and it gave me the courage to pick up a paintbrush for the first time in years. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start again." The letter brought tears to Ethan's eyes, and he wrote back to Margaret, thanking her for sharing her story. Her words stayed with him, and he decided to dedicate his next series of sketches to the theme of resilience and renewal. One day, Claire approached Ethan with an idea. "You know," she said, "I've been thinking about hosting a community art fair here at the cafe. It could be a chance for local artists to showcase their work and for people to connect through creativity. What do you think?" Ethan's face lit up. "That's an amazing idea," he said. "I'd love to help organize it." The two of them spent weeks planning the event, reaching out to local artists and spreading the word throughout the community. When the day of the art fair arrived, the cafe was transformed into a vibrant gallery filled with paintings, sculptures, and sketches from artists of all ages and backgrounds. Ethan's booth was a centerpiece of the fair, and he spent the day sharing his work and encouraging others to pursue their artistic passions. By the end of the event, Clara was beaming. "This was a huge success," she said. "We'll have to make it an annual tradition." Ethan nodded, his heart full. The art fair had not only brought the community together but also reminded him of why he had started this journey in the first place. As the years went by, Ethan's life continued to evolve in ways he never could have imagined. His workshops expanded to include online sessions, reaching people from all over the world. His art was featured in galleries, books, and even public spaces, but he never let his success change who he was. Through it all, the cafe remained his sanctuary. It was where he went to find inspiration, connect with others, and give back to the community that had given him so much. One evening, as the cafe was closing, Clara handed Ethan a small wrapped package. "What's this?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. "Just a little something to celebrate how far you've come," Clara said with a smile. Ethan opened the package to find a beautifully bound journal. On the first page, Clara had written a note. "For Ethan, whose art has touched countless lives. May this journal hold all the stories you have yet to tell." Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he read the note. "Thank you," he said softly. "This means so much to me." Clara placed a hand on his shoulder. "You've given so much to this community, Ethan. This is just a small token of our gratitude." Ethan smiled, his heart overflowing with emotion. As he left the cafe that night, journal in hand, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey was far from over, and he knew there were still countless stories waiting to be told.